Okay, 1966, Hubbard starts thinking that they need a base of operations outside of where major governments are going to give them problems, because the UK government had not ignored the Church of Scientology's presence at St. Hill Manor, and all these Americans and other people flying in and learning under him, and what were they saying and what were they doing. And Hubbard, remember, was very, very anti-government. He did not like any governments, and he definitely did not like governments interfering with what he thought was his money and his work. And he was very, very dismissive of any kind of authority besides himself. And you can hear this in his lectures, you know, such as how he was.
Can I just note quickly, forgive me if you've already mentioned this and I missed it, but
yeah,
it says that the FBI was tracking him from the early 50s, and that you know, and that also the tax exempt status of the Church of Scientology through the IRS was withdrawn in 58. So, you know, that's...
No, not 58. It was later.
Let's see. In 1958, the U.S. IRS withdrew the Washington, D.C. Church of Scientology's
Washington, D.C., but not the church overall.
Okay.
Yeah.
But lots of government heat from the FBI to the IRS to the FDA. You know, that totally makes sense that he fled to England. But then it looks like England and Australia caught on to him as well.
Exactly. They all did eventually, right? But there was this thing called freedom of religion that kept getting in the way, right? And this has been the bugbear of this, right? I've kind of avoided the government agency aspect of this, not because I was trying to avoid it. I just didn't make it part of the narrative here because I was kind of thinking about the organization and the subject. But you're absolutely right. Now, here's the catch, though, and this is the really crazy thing, is the reason the FBI was at all interested in what L. Ron Hubbard was doing is because he kept writing to them and telling them that his enemies from the early 50s were commies. He was trying to ride the Red Scare to get rid of his enemies and get the FBI to do it for him. And this is what he would do. He would write these crazy letters to the FBI about how people who had wronged him were communists. And in the 1950s, that was a serious charge. That was not just some name you called somebody. This was the subject of intense government investigation. This is the McCarthy era. So Hubbard was trying to use that to help him and get the government to help him put his enemies away in jail. Hubbard was an extremely vindictive person. He never forgave and forgot, ever. So when he thought that, say, Joseph Winter or Campbell or many other people over the years that had hooked up with him and allied with him and then eventually turned on him because he was just such a jerk, and he just cast people aside like they were nothing. So he would write these letters to the government complaining about these people. And one of those letters clearly, you know, the note on it was, you know, file away, but this guy is clearly mental. Right? So the FBI was not buying any of it. And so they started files on him because of that, and they sort of tracked his movements. The FDA had been investigating him because of practicing medicine without a license. And there was also drug therapy that had been involved in the early days. He had been putting vitamin bombs and things together in very, very extreme doses. And that was a concern of the FDA. So this is how he attracted government attention. But then he flipped the script when he would talk about these things to his followers and tell them that they were the ones being persecuted by the government, when in fact the government regulatory bodies were just doing their job, trying to keep this guy and his overpromises in check. So that's kind of how that went. And the tax exemption thing was exactly as you said. The DC founding church got their tax exemption revoked, but not all the other churches, just that one. And that was enough to send him flying off to England. So thanks for mentioning that, because I forgot that little detail.
No, I there's a million things we're not going to mention, but I just think that whole government pressure thing is really interesting and important. And of course, Joseph Smith, part of his undoing was government pressure, and that led to Brigham Young as well, about all the polygamy and all the all the scandal, the government just starts clamping down at some point.
Exactly. And that's what happened with Scientology too, in many ways, as we'll get to. Because what ended up happening at St. Hill, okay, Hubbard is feeling the pressure. Oh, there was also, I think it was 1963, there was an FDA raid on the Washington Church of Scientology because Hubbard had written to the government saying, hey, Scientology can help you guys with your space program and stuff. And various other complaints had been coming to the fore because everywhere Hubbard went, there were complaints that followed. I mean, he was, all these years that he was forming this organization and building this thing up, all the characteristics, and I really should have noted this, all the characteristics of a destructive cult were being developed during this time. So, you know, the idea of shunning and kicking people out and ruining their life, and Hubbard's vindictiveness. I mean, when he set his sights on somebody as an enemy, he would hire private investigators. He would use Scientologists to go persecute that person, what we now call fair gaming. But it hadn't even been that formalized of a thing that it had a name yet. It was just Hubbard having revenge on people. And he'd have people beaten up, and he'd have people followed, and intimidation tactics and stuff like that, because he didn't want people bad-mouthing him or his work. That was his trigger. If you bad-mouthed him or his work in a public way, you were public enemy number one as far as he was concerned. And he would set loose his dogs on you. And this is also shown in The Master, right? Very accurately as to how it was kind of done. So that was all going on during this time. So, okay, so he ends up in England, develops the Bridge to Total Freedom, lays this whole thing out, and he then is looking at the FDA raid, and he tried to get some positive media. You know, the picture that you might see around, some of you might have seen, of Hubbard with the tomatoes. And he's got his meter and he's got it plugged into these tomatoes, or he's got these gloves on and he's doing things with plants and stuff. This is at St. Hill, and Hubbard was trying to put himself out in the public as a legitimate scientist and researcher who was researching the nature of life itself. And he was putting out the idea that plant life was really no different from human life, in that the nature of life itself being this theta component. And he was trying to present himself and sell himself as a legitimate philanthropist and researcher, which of course nobody was particularly buying because Scientology was crazy. But that's what he was doing. So that failed. And that also hit Hubbard hard. In fact, there was one particular article, and I cannot right now remember which publication it was, but it was something Hubbard really invested in. I think it was 1964, 65 that he really, really wanted this article to be this positive media press about him and his work, and he thought it was going to be this wonderful, glowing article, and instead they totally panned him. And he was furious. I mean, beside himself with fury that he had been so betrayed by the media. And he had always been kind of down on the media, but now he really went to town. I mean, really. And he started developing conspiracy theories. And he then decided that St. Hill wasn't a safe enough place for Scientology. And they needed to kind of own their own country. They needed to own their own place, their own operation. And this is, this is, of course, parallel with the Mormons. It's also parallel with Jim Jones, taking off out of the United States and taking his folks, his 900 followers with him, is to a place where they had total environmental control. They didn't have to abide by the laws of the land. They didn't have to listen to anybody else telling them what to do. They didn't have to pay taxes. That's what Hubbard wanted. So he went down to Rhodesia in Africa. And he tried to infiltrate or get himself ingratiated with the government down there and set himself up as this philanthropic American. He had tons of money at this point. I mean, he had been rolling in it because Scientology is now an international movement. It's truly international in scope. It's not millions of members. It's never been millions of members. Okay. So again, it's small. It's not a big organization. There's tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 people at its peak in the 70s or early 80s. but it's not huge, and they're always misrepresenting their numbers. But it's big enough and international in scope enough that Hubbard's making bank. And he goes down to Rhodesia, and he literally writes them he suggests a constitution that he writes for the country, and he sends it to the government, and that's his announcement there. He's like, hey guys, I'm here, and here's a new idea for you. And there was all this tumultuous activity and political activity, and apartheid was still reigning in South Africa. And so he goes down there and makes a total mess of it, because again, he didn't have his wife with him, by the way, and he's again has no real solid organizational sense even after all these years. So he fails and he gets kicked out. They don't renew his visa. They know, no, dude, we don't want to have anything to do with you. We see what you're doing. Get the hell out of the country, right? And they had enough good sense to kick him out. There's another backstory there, by the way, which you might find humorous. And this is not according to Hubbard's own writings that I know of, but I've been told by reliable sources who were hooked up at the time, that Hubbard had the idea that he was Cecil Rhodes in a past life.
Oh, wow.
And he thought he was going to go down there and dig up hidden treasure that had been buried down there. And of course, they never found any. But he tried to set up a little hotel deal, and he tried to set up some business stuff down there, and it all just kind of fell apart after he got kicked out of the country. And he came back to St. Hill, and of course, he got a hero's welcome at St. Hill because they all loved him there. And but he decides after that, okay, there is no place we can go on land in this world where we can be safe from authority and laws and this oversight and these people interfering in what we're trying to do in our mission to salvage mankind. And I firmly believe that even if he started this whole thing because he thought it was just going to make him a bunch of money and he didn't really believe that he was onto something, I think it was actually a mix at the beginning. I think he thought he was onto something, but I think he also thought this was a great way to make money, thus the quote about starting a religion and making money. By this time, by the 1960s, I am absolutely convinced that L. Ron Hubbard was a 1,000% true believer in his subject. I don't think he thought he was running a con. Now, there are people who disagree with me about that. It's a subjective question, and in the end, it doesn't really matter. But that's what I believe where he was at in his headspace. Because
that is the biggest question post-Mormons have is, was he a conscious con? Was he a pious fraud? Did he believe in it, but believe the deception was okay?
Right.
And the wisest, even the most secular minds, like Dan Vogel, have come to the conclusion that there really was a genuine core of beliefs, but that was also accompanied with sort of a by any means necessary behavioral approach, which is what we're doing is true, but if we gotta, crack some eggs to make this omelet, we'll do it.
Right. Hey, I was about to use the same analogy exactly, and that was definitely Hubbard's mindset. He had no problem, and in fact, he wrote specifically, as a direct quote, in regard critics of Scientology, in regards to critics or people who have, apostates, right, former members who have turned on the organization, ruin them utterly, he said.
Yeah.
Right.
And Joseph Smith, if he propositioned a teenage girl for polygamy, and she would decline him, and be willing to talk about it publicly, he would go to the newspapers and eviscerate and destroy her reputation, call her a whore, call her a slut, because he couldn't have his work undone.
Exactly. That was Hubbard to a T. That same.
The other thing is this fleeing any government jurisdiction, even though it was after Joseph Smith was killed, Joseph Smith had envisioned this when he envisioned going to Mexico or, the unsettled Western United States. Obviously, Utah became our Sea Org.
Right.
Utah became our boat, right?
That's
where
right.
It was literally outside of the legal jurisdiction of the United States, unsupervised by federal law enforcement. And it wasn't until we wanted statehood and the westward expansion of the United States when we became reconfronting with the law officials there. So anyway, again, more parallels.
Exactly, and the parallels will continue because Hubbard, okay, earlier in life, remember Hubbard had been in the Navy. He had captained vessels. Hubbard was a competent, legitimate sailor. He was a small boat sailor. He was a big boat sailor. He really loved the ocean. He always had. And that was real. And he had done expeditions up to Alaska and stuff. And of course, back in his younger days, they had tried that whole mineralogical survey in Cuba and stuff, and different things. So he loved being out on the ocean, and that became a solution for him, because once every territory or country that he ever wanted to be in had basically kicked him out. I mean, England was revving up to kick him out of England. They had already banned Scientologists from coming into the country. They had been very uncomfortable with hundreds of Scientologists and these e-meters and this other stuff. England was not really down with any of this. St. Hill and East Grinstead, the little village, they really didn't have much of a choice. They had to deal with this. But the government was like, yeah, no, we're not down with cults being, operating in our midst. So Hubbard knew, again, from the writing on the wall, that England was not going to be a safe haven for him anymore. And after getting kicked out of Rhodesia, he knew Africa wasn't going to be a safe haven for him anymore. So the obvious answer was international waters. And in late 1966, he took off and he got some boats. And there's all kinds of details to this, but the bottom line is he started what started as the Sea Project for a year, and then became the Sea Organization. Not the Sea Church, that's the Sea Organization. And the Sea Organization was originally manned by people who had reached the state of OT. So these were people who had to be clear or above, I think. I think you had to be OT. So you had to have been at St. Hill. You had to have been around. You had to have been fully indoctrinated in Hubbard's, subject. You had to be like 100% on board. And volunteer only, they were taking people to become part of this secret project. In fact, they were hand-picking people at first. And then it grew and grew from there. But it started very, very tiny. And it started with a couple boats. And these were people who had no clue how to sail anything. And it's amazing. It is amazing that nobody died, because the stuff he put those people through was unbelievable. I mean, in terms of just getting these boats and getting them in shape and sailing them around, and he was sailing between Hull in England, I think where was a starting point. And they went down to off the coast of France and Spain and Gibraltar, and they went over to Greece eventually. That was kind of the area that they were sailing in. And I think the Canary Islands down there, and then Morocco. That zone or region is the area where the Sea Org started. In the first few years of its operation, they were on a flotilla of boats, and Hubbard was the admiral, or commodore rather. That was the rank he gave himself, and he set up a paramilitary organization that he said was necessary, because he said that you have to have discipline in order to have results, and the Sea Org was all about results, right? We were going to get things done. And it was time to deal with the planet. It was time to to figure out how Scientology was actually going to spread, and that we were going to clear the planet. Right? That became this sort of catchphrase. That wasn't the original target of the Sea Org, but that was kind of the concept of what Hubbard was selling. Of course, in 1967 is when the IRS revoked all tax exemption. And there had been a royal inquiry, was firing up down in Australia, because there were churches in Australia. And the Royal Commission was not impressed by Scientology, and they ended up banning Scientology from Australia, which in hindsight was a really stupid thing to do, because when you ban things, then of course people get more and more interested in them, and you're making martyrs out of people. So really not the best way to deal with Scientology. They really should have just enforced some laws, but they decided that they would try the banning route. And of course that creates public sympathy and, support. So eventually the ban got overturned, I think in 70 or 71. But the tax exemption That was a whole different matter. That was a big deal. And that was the IRS saying that L. Ron Hubbard had been shown conclusively to be personally profiting from this religious movement. And we're talking about profiting to the tune of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in the 1960s, that's millions and millions of dollars now. So Hubbard was a very rich man, but he was also violating the IRS tax code. By becoming so rich. And he was just taking money from the churches. I mean, it was just blatant money grab. So they lifted the tax exemption. Hubbard saw the writing on the wall, hit the waters, started the Sea Org, got a small group of followers that eventually grew. They modeled it after the Navy and Hubbard's experience with the Navy. So he ran a tight ship and he uniformed his crew. He gave them ranks and ratings, and they had, different ceremonies and stuff, like rank ceremonies and that kind of thing. And I think the anniversary of the Sea Org it's sometime in August 1967 is when the Sea Project officially became the Sea Organization, and that's continued all the way through now. The Sea Org is not the Church of Scientology. We should be clear that from a legal standpoint, the Sea Organization does not exist. It's not a fraternity. It's not a trust. It doesn't have bank accounts. It doesn't have membership as such. It exists really in name only, pretty much. There's very little legal paraphernalia connected with the Sea Org. But over the course of years from 1967 when it started until 1969, when it had 1970, when it had really taken over completely the management of the Church of Scientology. Little background on this. When Hubbard was running St. Hill and was delivering this course called the St. Hill Special Briefing Course, at the same time, he set up an international management structure for Scientology as a whole. So from his base in St. Hill, he set up telex, electronic communication systems, which at that time was state of the art. He could have immediate communication through telex with any Church of Scientology anywhere in the world. And he personally, and a small group of aides that he trained up, became the management body for the Church of Scientology. And this initially was called Worldwide, or Worldwide Management. And that also operated out of St. Hill Manor. So parallel with this course being delivered, you also have Scientology churches receiving orders and directions from L. Ron Hubbard directly or his immediate aides, telling them what to do on a fairly regular basis. So he's keeping in touch with and monitoring the progress of every Church of Scientology hands-on as a management person. When he started the Sea Organization, he tried to turn that over to the people that he had put in place. And at this point, it was something like 50, 75 people. I mean, it was a good-sized organization in itself, Worldwide Management. And they were managing Scientology. And he went off to do the Sea Project and, evade the governments and that kind of thing and put this little project together. And nobody really knew what he was up to. And then come around mid to late 67, there's a lecture that comes out, a recorded lecture that L. Ron Hubbard made called Ron's Journal 67. This is famous in Scientology. This is a very, very famous briefing that Hubbard recorded. I think he was on the Canary Islands at the time that he recorded it. You can hear the wind in the background and stuff. And he talks about how he discovered this new OT level. And up until that point, clear, you could go up to clear, and you could do something called OT1 and OT2. And that was the top of the bridge. That was as high as it went. And he then comes out with this new thing that he calls the Wall of Fire. And he said he called it the Wall of Fire because that's what he said he had to go through in order to discover it. He said he broke his back, he broke his arm, he almost died doing the research for this level. It was so traumatic and so stressful, but somehow he made it through and he learned the secrets of the universe. And this Wall of Fire level, this OT3 level, is what everybody now knows as the Xenu story. Right? We've seen this on South Park.
Yes.
Right? The
And
whole
show us your
Xenu,
shirt.
volcanoes.
And tell us what your shirt says.
Yes, it says, can I tell you about our Lord and Savior Xenu? All right. Now, Xenu is not a god or anything like that. Xenu is just a guy. And the Xenu part of the story is actually the least important part of the story, which is really funny because it's also the most outrageous part. But there's this whole narrative of volcanoes, and this all happened 76 trillion years ago or 75 million years ago or whatever it was. And I think it's 75 million years ago. Here on Earth, which at that time was known as Tegiak, and there was interstellar civilizations, and Earth was part of this interstellar society of 13 planets, and this was known as the Markab Confederacy. And there's a whole story to this, and it goes basically that there was a universal genocide carried out by this guy named Xenu, and Xenu was the Lord, ruler of this confederacy, and he was a madman along the same lines as Pol Pot or something like that, or Mao, right? So he decides that because there's this gross overpopulation of all these planets, there's millions and billions and trillions of people, that he's going to get rid of everybody, and that's going to be the solution to this. And he ships them all to Earth in spaceships that look like DC-9s. And blows everybody up by throwing nuclear weapons into the existing volcanoes on Earth, and then implanting all of the thetans that are left. Because when you kill somebody's body, you're not killing the thetan. You can't kill a thetan. A thetan doesn't exist in the physical universe. It just has an awareness of existing in the physical universe. It's not a material thing. But it's trapped in the physical universe because it believes that it is. This is sort of I'm really summarizing things here, but I'm trying to get through this particular Xenu narrative kind of quickly. And so the nature of a thetan is such that when you kill the body, the thetan is left there going, well, what just happened? And its normal course of activity is to then go to a hospital and get another body. And then you have a baby and you have a whole nother lifetime, and then the body dies, and then you're sitting there going, well, now what? Oh, I got to go get another body, and you go do that. And that's the cycle that all of the thetans on this planet are trapped in. And Scientology's ultimate promise is to free you from that endless cycle. It's kind of reminiscent to a Western mind to Buddhism. You're going to free yourself from this endless cycle of birth and death and birth and death. And that's what Hubbard ultimately promised with Scientology. That's what it had now grown to and developed into. So he announces this OT3 thing, but he doesn't tell the story. He doesn't even say the word Xenu. He says nothing about it. No one in Scientology, and I cannot stress this enough, no one in Scientology who has not gotten to the level of OT3 on this bridge to total freedom has ever heard of Xenu. They don't know anything about it. I was involved with this organization for 27 years, and I didn't hear the word Xenu until I got out and watched South Park, because I never got to OT3. I only got to clear. So that's how much of a secret it is within the world of Scientology. And the reason it's kept a secret is because in this briefing that Hubbard gave in 1967, he clearly stated that if you find out what this whole thing is about, what this whole wall of fire that he had just discovered, if you find out about it before you're ready, you will literally, not figuratively, you will literally catch pneumonia and you will be dead within 2 to 3 days. It will kill you, this knowledge will, if you're not ready for it, which means you have to go up all the steps of the bridge to get to OT3. That's why people don't skip right to the Xenu thing or anything like that, which is why nobody in Scientology who hasn't gotten to that level knows anything about it. It is the biggest secret in Scientology. You can't know about it. Okay. Because Scientologists believe you'll die.
Yeah. And again, this is for Mormons, the obvious parallel here is the Mormon temple ceremony or polygamy. Polygamy was a top secret thing that was denied by Joseph Smith. It's something he added towards the very end in terms of like really trying to institutionalize it. But then that got kind of enshrined in the Mormon temple ceremony, which was this top secret ceremony that you made all these death oaths and promises, and you literally physically demonstrated the ways that you would be killed, your heart cut out, your throat slit, being disemboweled, if you ever to reveal the secrets in the temple ceremony. So again, it's this higher level of doctrine or theology that's like comes towards the end, that's super intensely secret, that only the special people get to have access to, and it's punishable by death if you can't even talk about it, and it's punishable by death if you ever reveal it. Sound familiar?
Totally.
Okay, so here's my question, though.
Yep.
Mormonism was primed for that because Joseph Smith claimed to be a prophet, and what he meant by that is he talks to God, and God tells him the newest stuff. And so from the very beginning, the Book of Mormon is revealed through a prophet, the Book of Abraham through a prophet, and then the Doctrine and Covenants is this series of revelations where Joseph's always receiving revelations and then updating the teachings in the church. With L. Ron Hubbard, it was it evolved differently because it didn't start out that way. It started out as like a self-help book that becomes a set of procedures that then become more advanced over time. He wasn't claiming that he was talking to God, and there wasn't this sort of conditioning the members to think that he's always going up on high to get the newest thing. And so this famous talk, you said 1968, is that right?
67, yeah.
Yeah, the members aren't primed to think that he's a prophet receiving revelation. So, and this whole fictional story of Xenu, and again, everybody's got to listen to the South Park episode. What's the episode called?
Trapped in the Closet? It's the one with Tom Cruise?
Yeah, and it's a great South Park episode. It's probably not great if you're a Scientologist, but if you're a Mormon, It's like, oh, those kooky Scientologists, right?
That's
They're
right.
so weird, you know?
No, that episode lost a Scientologist's job because Isaac Hayes was a Scientologist, and he played chef on South Park, and he had to quit. The church forced him to quit that job because of that. Yeah,
I love the chef.
Oh, yeah.
He's passed away, right?
Yes. Yeah, he died a few years ago, yeah.
So, but what, so like, I'm trying to imagine how, and I'm sure when he came out with this, I don't want to call it a revelation. What do you call it? The letter? Like the speech?
Well, Hubbard considered all of this. He called all of this discoveries on the research trail, see? This was research.
Okay. But how do you research and find out about Xenu? Like, where was he? What was the context? Did he tell all the members?
You sit in a room by yourself with an e-meter, holding the cans and watching the dial, and, oh, that read, I wonder what that is. Like, I don't know what Hubbard's research method was, except that he went into a room by himself with an e-meter, and he came out with these stories.
And when so when he gives this talk in 67, do they make a recording of it and send it to all the Scientologists across the world?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. This briefing was a monumental briefing, and it was a recorded lecture that got sent around to all the churches. Everybody listened to it, and they were completely electrified by it. Okay, because this was a new thing.
So instead of claiming it was a revelation from God sent to a prophet, it's like a revelation from the God of the e-meter and the God of and the ritual of auditing, because that was the God of Scientology, was whatever the e-meter revealed, right?
Really, it came down to what Hubbard said. The thing about destructive cults is that the deity figure is the cult leader. But he's got to say there's a source, right? So, and the source was his own research and his own memories and recall. See,
through auditing,
solo auditing. I didn't even mention this. I should have brought this up. In 1965, while still at St. Hill, actually 64, maybe as early as 63, definitely by 64, Hubbard invented solo auditing, where you don't have a counselor or an auditor and the person receiving the auditing. It was called a pre-clear. You don't have that. You just have the auditor, who is the pre-clear, go into session and audit himself with a set of instructions written by L. Ron Hubbard, of course, but you're doing it silently to yourself. And that all started just a couple years before. And solo auditing were confidential procedures. That was the first time that Scientology had confidential, high-level information that was supposedly dangerous to people who were not advanced enough to be exposed to it. And so RJ67 in the Xenu story was not the first time that there was confidential information in Scientology, but it was the most advanced breakthrough on that topic, you could say. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And this is such a crazy story. Like,
Yeah.
like what?
Yeah.
I can just imagine, like, it's not rooted in anything. It's not rooted in, like, with the Book of Mormon or whatever. It's always like Jesus, or it's always like God or prophets. But this is really like bad science fiction being revealed and then incorporated into a quasi-religion, but really weird, really weird bad science fiction, right?
It is, but here's why I said, let me explain a little bit about why I said that the Xenu part of this is the least important part, ultimately, of OT3, OT level 3, for Scientologists, okay? The big reveal when you get onto OT3, okay, let's remember also, by the way, that the very first people to do this were the most hardcore committed Scientologists, right? The guys who had taken Hubbard at his word, had joined the C Project and the C organization, and were signed up for life. I mean, they were committed. So these were the people who initially took this story on and said, oh, okay, and ran with it. The important part of OT3 is that the result of Xenu and his genocide was that all of these thetans, spiritual entities, were trapped here. And not only were they trapped here on Earth, but they were trapped in clusters. They had been knocked into a state where they were not really fully conscious anymore, and they were stuck together, like they were glued together to other thetans. It's a very strange concept because a thetan's not a physical thing, so don't ask me to explain that part of it. This is all sort of symbolic, I guess. Hubbard doesn't really draw lines between, that kind of stuff. You just kind of have to take it as he talks about it. So that's the only way I can describe it. It doesn't make logical sense. This was one of my problems when I actually read it for the first time. I went, this doesn't make any damn sense. But for Scientologists, you can make anything make sense. That's the miracle of the human mind. So in a Scientology context, the important part of this whole narrative was the result of this, which is that all these thetans got screwed over hardcore because all their bodies were completely dissolved and just disintegrated in these nuclear hellfires. And they were trapped by electronic fields to be stuck here on this piss poor planet at the edge of the universe where nothing's happening. And they were just stuck here. And they were knocked into a state of near unconsciousness. And for a thetan to go unconscious, he's going to be out of it for quite a while, right? Millions of years even. So the people who habitate bodies on this planet are the poor souls who survived that whole thing. And they're pretty screwed up. They're so screwed up that they're not even up to being able to habit a body because they're in a near unconscious, dead kind of state. And they're clustered together in these groups. So the people that you see in your day-to-day existence are actually the ones who've managed to kind of come out of that enough to be able to run a body. And they have all these other thetans stuck to them. And so what you do when you actually audit OT3 and all the remaining OT levels, I might add, because this just carries on, is you telepathically contact every one of these thetans that are stuck to you one at a time, and you wake them up and you get them to realize that where they are and what the condition that they're in is, and you get to release them. You free them from this enmeshed, enslaved kind of condition that they've been in for millions and millions of years. They've been stuck to you. So you're freeing them.
And I just have to say, you may be floored at this, or maybe you and Jonathan Streeter have already discussed it. But Court of Mormon theology is this idea that prior to us coming to heaven as spirits incorporating a physical body, we were all spirits in heaven before, in a pre-existence. And there were even way more than have come to earth. And because of some bad decisions by about a third of those spirits, they were cast out of the plan and left to come to this earth as followers of Satan and incorporate our bodies and tempt us and get us to do bad things. And so even though that's a totally separate sort of, science fiction narrative, this basic framework of like, why do we do bad things as a person? Why is there mental illness? Why are we sometimes not even able to control our behavior? Why is there evil in the world? The sort of doctrinal device of creating some sort of external spirit or entity that is the main cause of the sin or of the bad behavior is very much a parallel, even though there's different names and structures. But what it really gets to is kind of like trying to satisfy questions and concerns around the human condition. Why am I sad? Why is there pain? Why is there suffering? Why do I keep doing bad things? Oh, let's project it onto these extraterrestrial spiritual forces, and let's offer ourselves up as an organization. Most importantly, give us money. We'll provide the cure to these supernatural forces that are controlling you and hurting you.
And I am nodding vigorously because you are nailing it. Everything you just said is exactly what OT3 is for Scientologists. It explains voices in your head. It explains bizarre behavior, because these thetans that are stuck to you, some of them wake up from time to time and look around and go, what? And that's the voices you hear in your head. You see, that's the reason you have impulses you can't explain, that you would never do, and yet you find yourself doing. And this is why Hubbard went so far. He oversold this so much that he said that this is the reason we have war. This is the reason we have criminality. This is the reason we have all the problems that we have on this planet. It is this incident that caused all of it. And so Scientologists who get to this level, and I have to stress that literally no more than 5% of Scientologists make it this high. Most people kick off or don't make it before they get to this level. So only 5% of the Scientologists that you're ever going to run into are even going to have ever heard the word Xenu, and they will never talk about it publicly for all the reasons we've already said. So they'll never acknowledge the truth of this. But when you get to that level, this is the answers. These are the answers you're supposed to be getting. And Scientologists are primed to expect that. They're not told what the specifics of the Xenu story are, but they are told that OT3 is the ultimate level. It will change everything about your view of life and other people. You will have more empathy for other people. You will have more compassion for other people, because you will understand them in a way you have never been able to understand them before.
Yeah, and that what that represents is the highest ritual. And so religions need ritual because it's somehow important to behavior, to learning the doctrine, to becoming committed, to the organization, to be devoted, and there needs to be ranks of privilege or of opportunity so that people have things to strive for, people can feel important, people can advance and feel a sense of accomplishment, and sort of a way to make people pay money. And by the way, you can't enter the Mormon temple without paying money. So it's just a different way of instituting a formalized ritual that requires money, that makes people feel like they're advancing, makes them feel like they're super special, super neat. And it all comes with this promise of like, you're going to become more enlightened. You're going to become a better person. You're going to become healed of all your problems. And in Mormonism, the culmination of that is actually a super secret ordinance that until a few years ago, most Mormons have never even heard of, which is the second anointing, where the Mormon, one of the apostles, one of the 12 apostles of the Mormon prophet, actually anoints, with oil a man or a woman and says, you've made it to heaven. You're going to be up there as a god someday. You've arrived. And in Mormonism, that's the crowning super secret ritual that only the really wealthy and privileged and connected ever get to even experience. And again, they're commanded to not talk about it and deny it, even to their own children.
Wow, even to their own children.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really interesting. I knew all of that except anything about the second anointing. I had never heard of that before. That is fascinating.
Yeah,
and again, everything you just said completely parallels OT3, or I should say really all the OT levels in Scientology, because they're now all the way up to OT8 is as high as you can go. And we'll get into those other levels in a little bit. But that's the Xenu thing is what sets the stage for the rest of the OT levels, because it's pretty much these thetans that are attached to you in Scientology are referred to by people at this level as body thetans, to differentiate them from free thetans or operating thetans who, or from thetans who run bodies like you and me, right? We're not operating thetans yet because we haven't achieved those levels, but we're not totally dead body thetans either. So, we're kind of in between. So the body thetans thing is what you address for the rest of the OT levels in different ways, but it starts at OT3. And that is absolutely advanced ritual to put all the things you just said into people's heads. And Scientologists who get to that level are absolutely convinced that they are in on something that is the secrets of the universe.
Right.
So it's so similar. I can't imagine that Hubbard didn't know all about Mormon rituals, because he definitely knew about Masonic rituals, and he definitely knew and had drawn from the whole OTO, levels and stuff, and Crowley's and occult stuff. And frankly, that's where most of this stuff all comes from. And I think that's probably where Smith got some of this stuff too. So
for sure.
Yeah, it goes back to the Masons and all that kind of crap. So
let me just check in. This is fascinating. I'm glued to the edge of my chair, as I suspected I'd be, Chris Shelton. We've got about 18 minutes until I've got it. So let's make sure we focus on kind of wrapping up L. Ron Hubbard's life.
Yep. Good.
And we can decide if we want to talk about David Miscavige now, or if we want to have that be the beginning of our next kind of...
I think let's cover Miscavige separately, because literally he has run Scientology longer than L. Ron Hubbard did now, or about the same amount of time, right? So let's talk about Miscavige second. So let's wrap up Hubbard. Okay, and this can go pretty fast, actually, because this was all the things we've covered are all the foundational things that make Scientology what it is. And I think I've done a decent enough job covering the basics.
Oh, you've done a fabulous job.
Thank you. Okay, so Hubbard releases this in 1967. By 1970, the Sea Organization has taken over management of Scientology from the group of people Hubbard left it to. He felt that they had done an incompetent job, had ruined it, had screwed it all up, so he took it over from them and just disbanded that management entity. And so the Sea Organization became the custodians of the OT levels. You could not go anywhere except to the Sea Org to get these OT levels. That doesn't mean you had to join the Sea Org to get them, but they were the people who delivered them. And it takes classroom supervisors and auditors to be able to deliver any Scientology services. So it just so happens that the Sea Organization started setting up their own churches of Scientology that were manned exclusively by Sea Org members. Originally, it was a mix, but at this point, they're exclusively Sea Org. So you have, within the hierarchy of Scientology, you have local city-level churches, like Hawaii, Seattle, Salt Lake City, etc. Those are manned by public Scientologists who sign voluntary contracts of commitment for 5 years, and they work for the church for really no pay, and they get to do free Scientology services as an exchange. But above them in the hierarchy are the Sea Org organizations, and those are the advanced organizations. That's literally what they're called, AOs, advanced organizations. And they deliver the OT levels. You can't do them at the city level churches. None of the people at the city level churches know any of this stuff about Xenu and stuff, unless the individual staff member has, of course, done the OT levels. So that's kind of structurally how it was all set up. And that all was set up in the 1970s. Hubbard sent out Sea Org members to Los Angeles, to Copenhagen, to, I think, Sydney. And they set up these advanced organizations. And there's one, the St. Hill Manor, where Hubbard resided all those years, that Scientology continues to own that property. And it is now an advanced organization of Scientology. So you can go there if you live in the UK, and that's where you would do your OT levels. So I think there's 5 or 6 AOs around the world. And of course, the one in Clearwater, which is the big one, right? And there's one in Los Angeles. So if you want to do these OT levels, you're going to end up traveling to one of these advanced organizations. And Sea Org members are the ones who are going to be servicing you. And that's been in place since 1970, 71. Hubbard also developed a whole management structure for Scientology through the 1970s. And it changed and evolved over the years. And it really wasn't finalized until the 80s after he was dead. But the basic structure he set up, and it's a hierarchical system of city-level churches, advanced organizations, and then you have the management. And it's Sea Org from there on up. All of Scientology is managed by the Sea Org, and like I said, they're the custodians of the advanced levels. And what that really means is that the Sea organization are basically what you would consider the fanatics of Scientology. And I use that word advisedly, knowing full well that I was one for 17 years. I was in a different headspace when I was there, for sure. It is 24.
And I'm dying to ask you that story, but that's coming.
Yeah, we'll get to my own personal story. But the Sea Org as a whole is hardcore. These are committed to a level that is monastic. Okay, that's really the only parallel I've ever been able to make, because the military doesn't even do it. You go to the military, and after boot camp, being in the military, unless you're in a war situation, it's a 9-to-5 job for most people. They do their time and then they go home and they have weekends off and that kind of stuff. And I know there's variations here and there, but basically that's kind of the drill. Nobody expects you to act like, a Nazi when you're in the American military, for example. It's a job. You get college, you get this, you get that, and that's kind of how it's looked at. That's not the Sea Org. The Sea Org is like you're joining a monastery. Like, it's full time. It's 24/7. There is no off time. There's no relax time. There's no time off kind of thing. You could be woken up at 3 a.m. because there's some emergency deal that has to be dealt with. And it happens all the time. The Sea Org is the most stressful lifestyle I know of. Short of, say, living in a concentration camp.
And we're going to come back and talk about that in detail, just to make sure our listeners know that.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you all the details of my own life with that, and it's extensive. But I just want to get across that the Sea Org is not a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah,
it is.
Absolutely.
It is uniformed. It is ranked. They have their own messing system. They have their own galleys that you live on base. Very few Sea Org members have cars. They don't have an outside life. That's just not what the Sea Org is.
And this is all stuff L. Ron Hubbard set up when he was alive.
Exactly. He created this in 1967, and he's the one who set all the rules. He wrote all the policies, all the guidelines, all the codes and everything that Sea Org members swear to and follow. I mean, this is what we did. So you are fully committed. That's all I'm trying to get across. And you get, the best you're going to have in terms of days off in the Sea Org is 1 day every 2 weeks. That's it. That's your time off, right?
So he created an organization of highly loyal and committed members with the highest levels of expectations and standards.
Exactly. And they are the hardcore dedicated fanatics. So that was the way.
Joseph Smith had something called the Council of 50, which was this super secret inner circle of people that would even be willing to kill other people, if necessary, to protect and defend him. So
that's right.
Yeah.
And what you saw through the 1970s, if you're familiar with the Church of Scientology at all, in 1977, they got busted by the FBI because the Church of Scientology, the C organization, had directed and overseen the infiltration of the United States government at a level that has not been repeated since by an internal domestic organization.
Except for Russia.
Yeah, right. No, I mean physically. I mean, they were literally physically in the IRS. They were in government installations. In fact, they got busted because what they were trying to do, in 1974, L. Ron Hubbard got sick and tired of living on the ocean all the time and not having a safe port, not having a safe place to be. And he was really, really sick of it, right? So he developed what he called Operation Snow White, or the Snow White program. And this was a series of targets that were supposed to result in his good name being restored in the various government offices of the world. And remember, they'd been accumulating files on this guy since 1950. Because he had been sending them crazy ass letters and stuff like that, right? I mean, he created all of his own trouble. And it was true that they were monitoring his activities, but they were doing it because he was breaking the law left, right, and center. So he gets to the point where he gets kind of fed up with this. He's got this group of hardcore followers who will do anything he tells them to do. And he had also set up a parallel structure under the control of Mary Sue, his wife, which was called the Guardian's Office. Now, this was not a Sea Org outfit, but its sole purpose was spying and infiltration, as well as public relations. It has now been renamed and rebranded as the Office of Special Affairs, or OSA. But at the time, in the 70s, it was the GO, or the Guardian's Office. So you had the GO and you had the Sea Org. Now, they were kind of a little bit, in competition with each other, but Mary Sue was over the GO, Hubbard was over the Sea Org, and the idea was that the GO was going to go into these government installations and they were going to clean the files. They were going to literally get rid of all the nasty reports about L. Ron Hubbard that the government had in its files. So they infiltrated the IRS amongst many other organizations. And this wasn't just the federal government, it was city, state governments as well, foreign and domestic. And they started trying to find what was in the files. And a guy named Gerald Wolf was one fine day in the IRS building, actually, I think it was at night, and he was making copies of all these files, of all the stuff they had. And I'm talking about like stacks and stacks of files, because they have a lot of stuff on Scientology. And he got caught, because he's not an IRS employee, and yet he had a badge and he was in there and he shouldn't have been. And somebody noted that. They were like, hey, you're not supposed to be in here. And they, kind of logged it. And somebody took note, and he came back and tried to do it again, and they caught him. And they arrested him, and he got busted. And the church immediately went into damage control. The GO went into overtime. Oh my God. And there were other people involved. And eventually, basically, what ended up happening was they raided the Los Angeles Church of Scientology, the big blue buildings. That's where I work, by the way. They raided it in 1977. The FBI had accumulated enough evidence that they went in there and said, okay, something's fishy, because we caught this guy making these copies and doing this weird stuff, and he's telling weird stories, and this isn't adding up. Let's go figure out what's going on. And they went in there with sledgehammers, and they got file cabinets after file cabinets after file cabinets of data. And they found Hubbard's program, the Snow White program, and all this other stuff that the GO had been involved in, where they had been trying to ruin people's lives. There was a journalist named Paulette Cooper who literally had been driven almost to the point of suicide by the church's covert operations in her life, because she had dared to write a book that was critical of Scientology, one of the first ones. So they tried to ruin her life. All of this came out in the files, right? She was like literally going nuts, and she was being prosecuted by the law, because the church had set her up as a patsy, or not a patsy, but as a person who had written in bomb threats against police or something. And so they had busted her. Turns out the church had set her up on purpose because they wanted to ruin her utterly, exactly according to Hubbard's policies. So this all comes out in this raid. 11 Scientologists, including Mary Sue Hubbard, went to jail.
It also says they raided the Washington, D.C. office, but that's not super important.
No, I mean, all the pictures come out of L.A., but yeah, it was a big raid. Yeah. And they got so much data. I mean, you FOIA request this stuff, and it's just stacks and stacks of documents.
But Mary Sue got sent to prison, man.
Yes, it was a huge bust. And of course, okay, so to summarize, L. Ron Hubbard, of course, threw her under the bus. And she went to jail. She took responsibility. Hubbard was an unindicted co-conspirator, and not one of those 11 people confessed that L. Ron Hubbard had anything to do with what had been going on. So he was kept separated. His own wife, Mary Sue, went to jail for him. And they had 2-year prison sentences, I think. This was a huge, huge PR nightmare for the church. And of course, they flipped the script and tried to make it all about how, it was all huffed up, puffed in, and it was just religious persecution and blah, blah, blah. But none of that was true. The church had gotten caught red-handed. As a result of this, there was a major reorganization and shakeup within the church. There were other actions that occurred too, which I really can't easily explain, but basically there was a structural reorganization of the entire church. And this all occurred in the early 1980s, and it changed over to the structure that it is now, where it is a labyrinth of corporations. One over another. It's very, very difficult legally to separate out how all of this is put together. And it was done for purposes of plausible deniability and separation of the corporation. So if one goes down, another one is still there to operate. So they actually brought on board the best tax accountants and corporate accountants and legal minds that they could hire to advise them on how to structure this whole thing so that L. Ron Hubbard and his name and his estate would always be completely protected and kept separate from all this other stuff that the church engages in. And because they haven't stopped doing the stuff I was just describing that they got busted for. They still do that crap. But they just do it in such a way that they're way more sneaky about it. And they have more layers of plausible deniability because they hire it out to contractors and private investigators and stuff, and instead of having Scientologists do their dirty work so much these days. So they restructured in the 80s. And part of the restructure, the main purpose of the restructure, was actually still trying to clear Hubbard's name. And the fact of the matter is they never pulled that off, and then he died. And he died in, I think it was January 1986.
And this report that I'm reading basically says that at some point he moves to California and builds this massive top secret kind of ranch thing, right?
Yeah, there's a couple places actually. He went into hiding when the FBI raid happened. Hubbard was Hubbard went on to sea to hide. He came back to shore, and they started up in Florida, in Clearwater, where they now have their international base of operations, in 1975. But Hubbard still couldn't be seen in public. Anytime it came up that his name was out there, I mean, legal authorities were pursuing him. Right. And keep in mind that after the tax exemption was pulled, Hubbard did not pay any more taxes, and he did not authorize Scientology to. So they were just accumulating tax debt year after year after year, fighting this decision for tax exemption and not winning. So all through the 70s, all through the 80s, this tax bill was building up. And this was a great stress point for the church and for Hubbard. So he couldn't be seen in public. He couldn't show his face, and he hated that. He was also going nuts. He was suffering from dementia. He had a heart attack in I think 77 or 76. Which he barely survived. I think he actually had 2 of them. He was being kept in hiding. People didn't exactly know precisely where he was, except a small number of people that he was, his most trusted, most loyal Sea Org members were directly working for him. And finally, they settled in California, out in the desert region of San Jacinto, actually, which is where the what's called the Gold Base, or the international base, is located in San Jacinto outside of Hemet, California. That's basically where they settled. But then when the whole raid went down and Mary Sue went to jail and all that, Hubbard was like, oh my God. And he really went into hiding. He even went into hiding from Scientology. There were only three people, who were with him, who knew his exact location. He actually traveled around the country for a while in a Bluebird RV, great big blue RV bus. And then after a couple of years of driving around in the western states, he settled down in Creston, California, outside San Luis Obispo. And that is where he built a ranch. I think there was a ranch already there, and they built up this ranch. And that's where he spent the last years of his life. And he was cared for by two Sea Org members and a guy named Sarge Pfauth, Steve Pfauth. And Steve is dead now. Hubbard, of course, died in 86. And the only thing we know about what went down at that location and in that time is because after Hubbard's death, Steve Pfauth spoke out, and a couple other people who were involved in that time period after Hubbard died and found out what happened have come out of the church and have spoken out about that time period. Otherwise, we really wouldn't know anything because he was in hiding.
Says he built a horse track that never really got used, an observation tower. It also says that he was like composing music and he wrote, towards the end of his life, he wrote a couple more kind of fiction books, right?
Yep. Battlefield Earth, and then the Mission Earth series.
And was Battlefield Earth, did it talk about Xenu and that whole thing?
Nope.
Okay.
Hubbard, but get this. After Star Wars came out in 1977, Hubbard wanted to ride that wave. And check this out. He wrote a screenplay called Revolt in the Stars, where he made a dramatized version of the Xenu story. And I've never really been able to get over that, because he says in the materials, if anybody finds out about this, they're going to die. And then he writes a screenplay where he basically lays it all out. So I thought that was kind of hilarious. But he did that. So, but that screenplay, they tried really, really hard in 1978, 79 to get that thing funded and made into a movie, and it never happened because it was so awful. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. So that kind of faded. And and like I said, he was in hiding, and Creston was where he lived out the last years of his life. He was in communication with the church. I mean, they knew he was around. They just didn't know exactly where. Nobody knew. And we'll get into the David Miscavige story next time, and I can go into more detail about all that. But it was during that time that David Miscavige's rise to power started.
Yeah. So, and it says that he died being worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Yeah, I think if you look at the church's total value, you might say that. I think personally, he had a lot of money. And there's also questions about his will. It looks like his will was switched out 2 days before he died, and the signature is a little suspect and stuff like that. So, like, for example, his family got almost nothing. They just got a couple $100,000.
What did Mary Sue? Were they estranged? Did she reconcile?
No, she got thrown under the bus, but she remained loyal. He died. He cut communication with her. I think maybe there was a letter. I seem to remember hearing something about a letter, but it was not like a reconciliation. Miscavige actually dealt with her personally. After she got out of jail, they put her up in a house near Big Blue in Los Angeles. And she lived out the rest of her years there, quiet, unknown. Nobody really knew where she was except a few church members. And Miscavige basically strong-armed her into keeping her mouth shut. And they just kind of took care of her. But she never saw or reconciled with Hubbard after that whole raid and fiasco and prison sentence.
It's kind of amazing how these people can engender loyalty after so much kind of scorched earth. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I think Mary Sue probably thought that her children would suffer because one of her daughters was and is still in the Sea Org, and she had already lost one of their kids, Arthur, I think, to suicide. He was a closet homosexual. Hubbard hated homosexuals. He was not at all interested in the Sea Org or Scientology. I mean, he was interested in Scientology, got trained up and stuff, but he wasn't in the Sea Org. He didn't really want to get into that whole thing, and he ended up killing himself. And outside of Las Vegas, I think, after a bender, and he had the hose into the car and stuff, and it was ruled a suicide, and there's really no reason to suspect it was anything other than that. When Mary Sue found out, she screamed bloody murder. She could not believe that that had happened. And Hubbard's reaction was, God damn that kid, what's he done to me now? So something similar to that. So Mary Sue loved her kids, loved them. She was all about the family. Hubbard, not so much. Hubbard loved the kids who loved him. And, you know, because he was all about self-aggrandizement and himself. He was Mr. Ego. So it was a much more tragic loss for her than it was for him. And then when he threw her under the bus, she saw it as, you know, this is what you got to do. This is the price you have to pay for, you know, for loyalty and for saving the world, you know, because everybody in the Sea Org, you know, these are not people who understand that they are part of a con. These are people who truly, utterly, and completely believe that everything they do is a forward motion to saving the world. And they have to fight the good fight. And that means that they have to fight against people who are going to fight them back, but they love them, so they have to save them, you know, sort of thing. It's all kind of, it's this very weird, twisted sort of thing. But that's where Sea Org members' heads are at. So I've seen, and I was perfectly willing when I was a Sea Org member to throw myself under the bus for the movement. You know, I wouldn't have thought twice about it.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about how intelligent these people are. There's always this sort of Mormon feeling. It's just like, how could someone know all these problems with the church and still believe? There's no correlation between religious devotion and intelligence.
None.
And
zero. Zilch.
There's a ton
of top early leaders
in Scientology that went to Stanford, that went to Harvard, you know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's doctors, lawyers, you know, lots of them actually in Scientology. It's not intelligence. That's not the factor. You know, joining a cult usually follows a life-changing event of some kind. And usually a traumatic one, or a person feels disoriented and traumatized, and they need something to quell that. And that's why they join the group. And nobody joins a cult. At least that, you know, they don't think that that's what they're doing. And it usually takes another life-changing event to get them out of it.
Whoever thinks they're in a cult, right?
Nobody thinks they're in a cult. I used to laugh at it. You know, I used to tell people, yeah, Scientology's a cult, and so is the Catholic Church. Just open a dictionary, you know?
Don't give that away. We're going to come back to your story.
Yes.
Okay, so that has been a spellbinding 3+ hours with Chris Shelton as we've listened to the history of the Scientology movement and L. Ron Hubbard, and drawn excessive parallels to Joseph Smith in the Mormon Church.
I loved the parallels, man. I was really, really glad to learn that stuff. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. So listeners, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone who's been tuning in. We've, you know, for an afternoon, we've had a healthy continued audience of participants. We haven't been able to incorporate all the questions and comments, but we will be coming back with Chris. We're going to have him talk about the David Miscavige administration and what it's like to be a Scientologist today. And then we're going to actually have Chris tell his story. So we're going to have much more from Chris Shelton. Chris, thank you so much for giving us your time. And will you do one final plug for all of your good offerings? Absolutely. Okay. Again, thank you very much for this time. I've never spoken at this length in one go, and I really appreciate it. The book is Scientology A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about. You can get it on Amazon. And it is a critical analysis of the subject. It is not a memoir. I'm only in chapter 1.
So I hope you guys will check that out if you're really interested in this stuff, because I go into more depth and detail about everything we've talked about here. And of course, I have my YouTube channel, which is my name, Chris Shelton. And you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/criticalthinkeratlarge, because that is how I identify myself.
All right. All right. Well, let's schedule some time and let's get you back and we'll do the other interviews. Thanks so much, Chris Shelton. Thanks to all our listeners. Please know that we're doing more of these interviews, but also if you want to attend a one-day conference of 4,000 post-Mormons dedicated to healing and growth and positivity after Mormonism, where Wayne Sermon, the lead singer of Imagine Dragons, Amber Scora, the author of Leaving the Witness, the Jehovah's Witness Church, Natasha Elford Parker, Stephanie Sorensen Larson, Donna Showalter, Christian Moore, Hansa Brigida Matson. It's going to be an incredible affair. Please sign up at thrivebeyondmormonism.com. Tell your friends. We're going to operate the event at a loss. I think it's $15 a person. We're going to lose thousands of dollars, but we're doing this because we believe in promoting healing and growth for Mormons. So please check that out. Please, thank you to all our donors on Mormon Stories Podcast that donate to make this possible. If you want to see programming like this continue and you're not a donor, please go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button. 10, 15, 50, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. We're a nonprofit. We are transparent financially, and we will make sure that your money is given to promote healing and growth for people who are leaving Mormon Orthodoxy and or the Mormon Church. So please support us if you can. Chris, you're awesome, and we'll see you guys all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories. Take care, everybody.